there, welcome back to Ilum Sabers. If you're new to the channel, normally what I do here is install, update, and review lightsabers, primarily NeoPixel, but I do review all kinds of lightsabers. And today, instead of doing a lightsaber video, I wanted to do something that was related, but just a little bit different. So we're still on Star Wars today, of course, but today I wanted to do a bit of a book review of Jedi Battle Scars. So if you're following the Jedi series, Jedi Fallen Order from 2019, and Jedi Survivor, the sequel game that's going to be coming out next month, you're probably aware that Jedi Battle Scars is a new book that came out last month. So I wanted to go ahead and just give my thoughts. So I'm going to do this in two parts. I'm going to do a more basic discussion of the book, sort of some of the stuff about the writing style, the tone, stuff that can be spoiler-free, and then I'll do a second section where I dive into more of the details of the book itself and sort of give more detailed thoughts for those of you who have read it or for those of you who aren't going to read it. So starting off, Battle Scars is written by Sam Maggs. It is, following the crew of the Mantis or the Stinger Mantis. I believe Battle Scars is about 2 years after Fallen Order and about 3 years before Survivor, but right around that halfway mark because Survivor is 5 years after Fallen Order. So we're still following the same crew, and you can see on the cover they're very prominently displayed. And of course, not giving anything away, the Inquisitor, the fifth brother, is going to make an appearance in this book. We know him from Rebels. We also saw him in the Kenobi series. And, just looking at the cover, we can see we've got Cal, we've got Seer, we've got Grease down here, and then we also have Marin. And so the book itself is comprised of several chapters that are, I'll look up the exact number here, I forget. I think 18 chapters, 19 chapters, yes, 19 chapters. If you were to listen to it on Audible, it's a pretty short one. I think it's maybe 10 hours to listen to or something like that. It's a bit shorter. It is, I think, right around 280 pages, 279 pages. So it's a bit of a shorter book, but I feel like it was a well-encompassed story. It didn't feel too short. It didn't feel like they rushed it. It felt like a good story. So we do pick up with our Mantis crew 2 years after the events of Fallen Order. And the way that the book is structured, we get chapters from each character's perspective. So I would say that we get probably 30 to 35% of both Marin and Cal. So maybe 60 to 70% of the two of those characters. And then the remaining 30 to 40% is going to be split between Seer, Grease, and then a couple of newer characters as well, without really spoiling too much, but we will have a little bit from the fifth brother's perspective as well. Really, Cal and Marin are kind of the two central figures of the book, but we do get a lot from Seer and from Grease as well. And I think what I really enjoyed about this book the most, again, without getting into spoilers, is that it really feels like, the book itself feels like those parts in Jedi Fallen Order where you're not running and flipping and wall running and climbing. It feels like the parts where you're on the Stinger Mantis, where you're talking to Seer, you're talking to Grease. The scene where Grease wakes Cal up on the Mantis after he's, had a rough go of it, and he wakes Cal up and he says, "Hey, I don't know what's going on between you and Seer, but I really appreciate you guys," basically. Scenes like that. So it feels like the cutscenes, but it also feels like some of the optional interactive scenes where they land on a planet and you can choose to go up to Seer and to Grease and later on to Marin, press the interact button and get another conversation from them, get a little extra information. So that's really what this feels like. It feels like a culmination of both of those things. So you really are getting a really character forward story. I mean, the plot of the book is compelling. I didn't find myself bored. And I was really interested in how the events of the plot were going to unfold as they did. But I would say that the real star of the book are the characters. The book exists to show us the progression of the characters from Fallen Order to Survivor and kind of show us how we get to where we are in Survivor, right? Because in the Survivor trailers, we see that the crew's kind of split up. Cal somehow still has the Mantis, even though it is Grease's ship. We're told in Fallen Order anyway. But Seer's off doing her own thing, sort of looking like she's starting Jedi Archives. Marin, we don't really know too much about. Looks like Grease might be starting a cantina or something, and Grease is missing an arm in that trailer. A lot of pieces that we don't have between the two, between Fallen Order and Survivor. And so this book is kind of helping fill the gaps and sort of show the reader how some of the things that we see in the trailer, where the seeds of that were sort of planted. Without really delving too far into it, I just think that the perspectives from each of the characters that we get going through the book really show us where each of them are in their individual journeys and their headspace, as they're going through their adventures, and how that sort of begins to lead them astray from each other. So I think that's probably as far as I can go without doing any spoilers. So consider this your spoiler warning mark. From here on out, we will be discussing more details of the book that will have spoiler details. So I'll try to be kind of lighter on those if I can at first, but know that where we are going is just full spoiler territory. So kind of what I was talking about just a moment ago was how the characters were, we could see through their perspectives, each chapter from a different character's perspective, how they were kind of starting to drift away from each other, right? And in the story, multiple times we see Cal refer to the Mantis crew as his family. And we see him do that more than any other character. I think we see Merrin do that a little bit, but certainly more than any other character. Cal feels like this group is his family. He needs them to stick together. We see that emotionally he's very attached to all of them. And he even at one point asks Seer, as a Jedi, we're not supposed to have attachments, but we clearly are all very attached to each other. What does that mean? And I think that's really great because that's one of the fundamental questions that we have after watching Clone Wars and seeing what attachments can do to Anakin. But then also reading some of the Legends material where Luke's New Jedi Academy doesn't forbid attachments, and we don't really know that much about Luke's New Jedi Academy in canon yet, so we don't know where Luke takes that, but it definitely seemed like in the prequels, part of the issue with the Jedi was they were so dogmatic about not having attachments, right? And so I think we kind of see a little bit maybe of that with Kanan and Hera, where Kanan is, has some sort of relationship with Hera, and maybe even is attached to her in the way that you'd care for someone, but he is able to let that go, right? He's able to let go of destiny, per se, leave it to the Force and let things take care of themselves, accepting that, an outcome that may make him sad because he loses someone he cares about may be the will of the Force, right? So sort of that Qui-Gon Jinn sort of viewpoint again. And so I think Seer isn't at that point when Cal asks that question, right? She just says, I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means for us as Jedi. I don't know what that means for us as people. But I know that if we don't care about the people of the galaxy, then what's the point of saving them, right? Like, we have to care in order to try. That's kind of where Cal is. Merrin sees these people as sort of a second family because she lost her family on Dathomir. But most of Merrin's time in the novel is actually focused on her mourning her Night Sister family. And we actually get a lot of Merrin's magic in this book, so we actually get to learn about how it works. I thought that was really neat to get sort of a more like inside, like from Merrin's head perspective of how the magic works, especially since it's connected to the Force, and just how that works in that way. And I think it's also interesting because we didn't really get this so much in the first game, but we did get it addressed a little bit in the book. Cal and Merrin are both individually think about and then briefly talk about the discrepancy of, Cal is very much using the light side of the Force. He's a Jedi, and Merrin's magic taps into the dark side. And neither of them really understand the specifics of how Merrin's magic taps into the dark side. And it's not really explained super in depth, but it is discussed. And I think what's really interesting is how they feel about that sort of difference. And I think Grease in this novel really shines because he's just there, right? He's like this crazy pilot who gets caught up in this in the first game, and he's just along for the ride, and he cares for these people, and that's why he's along for the ride. But that's where we start to see sort of the discrepancy between what each of the characters are wanting, right? So I mentioned Cal, his motivation is really just stopping the Empire, right? For him, cut and dry. Stopping the Empire because the Empire is bad. For Seer, it's a little bit different. Seer wants to save the Jedi Order. And we also saw that in the first game too, right? Seer says this is about rebuilding the Jedi Order. And then they destroy the holocron, so it kind of leaves you with where do we go from here, right? But I think at this point in the story, Seer has sort of moved on from the holocron, right? Because they've decided they need to leave the lives of the children on the holocron alone. They need to let them live normal lives if they can. But Seer is also of the mindset of, if there are people who are force sensitive, who have already found out they're force sensitive, they're already on the run from the Empire, they need to take them in, and they can sort of help rebuild the Jedi Order that way. And it's not explicitly stated, but Seer wants to gather artifacts for the Jedi Order. And so that's part of what the plot of this book is about, is gathering artifacts, have things to point at for future generations of Jedi as they rebuild, to say this is what we once were and this is what we can become again. Merrin, as I already stated, a lot of her time is spent mourning her sisters on Dathomir, and as you can probably guess, her motivations are not stopping the Empire because the Empire is bad, not stopping the Empire because the Empire oppresses people, but she wants to get revenge for what happened to her Night Sisters, right? And she, it actually is mentioned in the book, she is fully aware, and the crew has surmised at this point, that the Clone War was basically orchestrated and played from both sides. So she's aware that the people who are in charge of the Empire are also essentially responsible for the death of her Night Sister clan. And she also says multiple times that it doesn't matter if they're not the Separatists, they're not the same people, right? But they're just more bad people. So she basically is looking to get revenge. And I think that unsettles Cal as well, because that's very, against what his training is for him to seek after. And so I think that bothers him. And Grease is actually the most different of all of them. And I think Grease and Seer find some common ground. But essentially, Grease is saying that he thinks they've done enough, right? He says that the most that they've done hasn't even put a dent in the hull of the Empire's big ship, so to speak. He says that they should pack it up while they can, get out while they're still ahead. And of course, Grease is the gambler, right? So he knows sort of, we saw in the first game, maybe he doesn't know when he's gambling when to quit, but he's familiar with this, right? He's familiar with, the streak of good luck and then sort of everything falling out from under you. And so Grease says that they should find a little patch of land on a little unknown world somewhere and just settle down. Just play it safe. He wants to take care of these people because he cares about them. And Seer, I think, is starting to sort of side with Grease because she wants to set down roots somewhere where she can sort of start a Jedi collection of antiquities that can maybe become an academy or something. So you can kind of see right there, all of the characters are starting to pull away from each other. And I think that is really interesting because when we see the Jedi Survivor trailer, we see them all split up and we don't really know why. So this kind of says, hey, they were all after the same end goal, which was maybe taking out the Empire, but they were going after it for different reasons. And Grease was just going after it because that's what his family wanted, right? That's what his friends wanted. Merrin was for revenge. Cal was because he wanted to end oppression. And Seer, because she wanted to remove the organization that destroyed the Jedi so she could rebuild them. What happens kind of early on is we get Fret, who's a new character. She's a stormtrooper, but not really. We learn that she's not really a stormtrooper. She's more of an analytics officer disguised as a stormtrooper because she's trying to escape the Empire. So the crew helps Fret escape. The crew's already on a mission and Fret finds them and explains her situation. And after a lot of deliberation, the crew decides to tentatively trust Fret and take her along because Fret has information to be a really powerful tool against the Empire. The crew decides to go after this. The stakes are high enough, right? Because we know that, of course, the Empire is developing super weapons as well. So something like this maybe isn't as big of a deal as we feel like it is, but in the hands of the rebellion, it would be a big deal. And so I think that is definitely something that is compelling. But again, the characters are really what shine here. So Fret and Merrin quickly realize that they sort of have feelings for each other right off the bat. It's kind of an at first sight kind of thing. And through this perspective of having Fret now come on board, we get to learn more about Merrin. We get to learn about the psychological trauma that living through General Grievous's attack on Dathomir has caused her, seeing all of her Night Sisters die. And we also get to learn about the girl that was Merrin's first love. So she talks briefly about this in Fallen Order right towards the end of the story. We don't really know a whole lot about her. We know her name, and we know that Merrin had to bury her. Merrin says, I thought we would be together forever, but I buried her, basically. And so that was pretty heartbreaking. And we learn a little bit more about her in this book. And we also see that Cal is pretty much oblivious to Merrin and Fret's being together for most of the book, until Grease starts making sort of snide side comments about how they better, be behaving themselves in his ship and that kind of stuff. Cal starts to sort of catch on. But something that's really interesting is, a lot of fans thought after the first game that we were going to kind of see Cal and Merrin end up together. And I saw a lot of fans who had read this book or had read synopses of this book say that, oh, well, this just proves that Cal and Merrin aren't going to be together. And I really disagree with that, actually. This book really does a good job of, using Fret as a sort of plot device for Merrin's character to move her past her trauma from Dathomir and into a more healthy headspace moving forward. I don't want to spoil the entire ending, but basically, Fret ends up having to go her own way, and during the parts of the story where Fret is with them, Cal is finding himself jealous of Fret, but he doesn't know why, because he doesn't realize that he has romantic feelings for Merrin. I mean, obviously, he's a Jedi, attachments are forbidden. His entire childhood was spent pretty much solitarily being, a student of the Force, and then an outcast on Braca. So he doesn't really know why he's feeling what he is, but he's starting to feel jealous of Merrin. He kind of calls her his Merrin a couple points in the book. And Merrin is completely oblivious to Cal's feelings until Fret points them out right before Fret leaves. She says, I can see, the way he looks at you, or something like that. And Merrin's like, what are you talking about? And like completely oblivious. And then pretty shortly after, the book says that Merrin looked at Cal in a way that she hadn't before, and Cal, basically does similarly. And we're not really left with much more than that, but at this point they're both starting to realize that they have feelings for each other, which I think was a good progression from the first game, because again, in the first game they were both pretty isolated for most of their teenage years, and so something like this would be pretty novel to them, and it might take them some time to sort of figure out what's going on in their own heads. So I think that was pretty charming, and I think the end of the book really hints that maybe in Jedi Survivor we will see them together, or maybe we'll find out in Jedi Survivor that they did get together and it didn't work, and maybe that's why Cal and Merrin are separated, as well as the rest of the crew being separated from each other. It's really hard to say. Overall, I really enjoyed the book. Like I said, we really get a lot from each character's perspective. We see where each of them is in their own individual journeys, why or what their motivations are for fighting the Empire, and we sort of start to see the breakdown in the crew, why we see them, apart at the beginning of the next game. Of course, the stuff with the fifth brother is really compelling as well. I think he actually pops up twice. The second time actually is really interesting because Seer sees Trilla in him basically and tries to save the fifth brother. Again, here's another kind of big spoiler alert, but that is how Grease's arm gets cut off, right? Seer is sort of distracted and trying to sort of figure out a way to save the fifth brother from himself, and Cal has been incapacitated during a duel with the fifth brother. And the fifth brother goes in for the kill on Cal, and Grease jumps in front of the blade and gets his arm cut off. And of course he spends the whole rest of the book whining about it, making a big deal about it, but in his loving way. And of course I'm sure that it really does bother him because his arm got cut off. He starts joking later on in the book how if it weren't for Seer it wouldn't have happened, and so he starts saying Seer cut his arm off, and just stuff like that really, like I said, is very endearing and very reminiscent of the crew that we saw in the first game. And I think something else that is pretty neat is we actually do get a few small little flashbacks of Cal, of his master Jared T'Pol. And I also feel like the lines that we get of Jared T'Pol really feel like they nail the tone of T'Pol as well. I feel like all of while the plot itself is interesting and it had me, really invested in what was going to happen, I really, after finishing the book and sitting on it for a couple weeks, looking back at it, the part that I really enjoyed the most was the characters. It was very character forward, very character driven, really made me excited to play the sequel game. In fact, after I finished the book, I actually was inspired to go back and play through Jedi Fallen Order for a third time, playing through it again with the book fresh in my mind. I really felt like the interactions in the book were very authentic to the game. And that's why I wanted to wait to do the review until after I'd finished the game, because I wanted to see, you know, reading it at first, it felt like the tone was really matching up well, but I wanted to play through the game and see how well the game's tone matched up after having reading the book. And it really felt very authentic to the original story. I think another thing that really helps with the tone of the book and really helps drive the characters' individual tones is that Mags kind of comes at the book with a bit of an irreverent tone. And I don't mean she's irreverent for the universe, I don't mean she's irreverent for the characters, but she injects the characters with a tone of irreverence towards a lot of the situations that they're in, which feels very authentic to the tone of the game as well, right? So something that kind of feels like Cal to me is he faces impossible odds and he's like, of course, we've got to deal with this, like, of course. And it's a very sort of Han Solo kind of vibe to it as well, right? It's a very like, Cal's not interested in knowing the odds. Cal isn't interested in, you know, being reasoned with a lot of times. He just, the path forward is what he sees and that's what he takes. And all of the characters have this in their own way, and they all, you know, it fits different characters differently than some of the other ones, but I think all of them are done well, right? The tone is a little different for each character, but the irreverence towards their situation and the irony in their situation matches well with the tone of the game. So I feel like, you know, all in all, my biggest praise of this book is that the tone of the novel matches the tone of the game so well that I at times felt like I was just watching a cutscene of Fallen Order. And at other times I felt like the way Mags was describing the action, it honestly felt like I was back at the controller, right? It felt like I was in the middle of an action sequence in the game. So I felt like, you know, a book that does so well at matching the tone of the first game and leading into the second game with sort of the crumbs that it drops, I definitely feel like this is worth a read for anyone who hasn't read it. Of course, if you've watched to the end, you've gotten all the spoilers, you have hopefully read it, and if not, you know, I didn't give all of it away, so it's probably still worth a read for you. For those of you who skip to the end, not wanting to see the spoilers, you know, like I said, I really suggest reading this book because I really enjoyed it. I got through it in just a couple days. It's a very short read, but it's also a very entrancing read. You feel like you're right there with the characters, which is the best you can hope for with a book. Any Star Wars book that I read, if it makes me feel like the characters that I see on screen are in the book, that's going to sell it for me. So I really feel like this is really worth it. I would suggest picking it up for your Star Wars book collection if you're into reading that kind of stuff, or checking it out. Maybe check out the audiobook. And hopefully you enjoyed as much as I did. I definitely have seen some mixed reviews. It certainly is not the most, you know, intricate plot. The plot itself is pretty linear, but with it being as character driven as it is, I really felt like that was more than acceptable. I felt like the kind of book that this is, we needed to know more about the characters than one of the missions that they go on in the 5-year gap between the games. So I think that this was really good. It was a really good snippet of the characters' lives and a pivotal point in time for them, and shows us kind of their trajectory. And so hopefully going into the second game, those of you who have read this book will kind of get a better idea of kind of what's going on. And I'm sure that for those of you who don't get a chance to pick up the book before then or read it, the game will probably make you want to read it. And I'm sure the game will do a good job of not leaving you stranded if you don't end up reading the book. So thanks again for joining me today with this book review. I know that we did something different today. I hope that it worked out well. I hope that you guys enjoyed the book review, and I will see you in the next video.